Welcome to this seminar at the Institute of Advanced Research in Artificial Intelligence in Vienna. I'm David Kreil, and I have the honor of being your host today. Today's speaker is Professor Erol Gelenbe of the Polish Academy of Sciences. He is a fellow of the Royal Society of the UK, the IEEE, the ACM, and other prestigious learned societies, and has been the recipient of the highest awards from academic institutions all over the world, including the French and the Hungarian Academies of Sciences, the ACM Lifetime Achievement Award, the Oliver Lodge Medal of the British IET, and the Mustafa Prize. Well known as doyen in network modeling, his illustrious career has actually traversed the network of his own, performing leading research at top academic institutions around the globe, including Paris, London, several institutions in the United States, and China. He consequently is involved at the highest levels of network research and policy advice in Europe and beyond. He's the inventor of the random neural network and will today discuss its applications to cognitive packet networks, a talk that I'm really looking forward to. It is with great delight that I welcome Erol as a distinguished speaker to the seminar. Erol, the floor is yours.
Well, thank you very much for this lovely introduction. I hope the talk will deserve the introduction. It's always hard to, meet the expectations once you have such a great introduction.
Confident.
But let me just tell you a little bit what this is all about, okay? As you know, one says that a picture or a video is worth 1,000 words. So let me start with a video of an experimental run on the cognitive packet network. And this experimental run on the cognitive packet network will be completely managed automatically by random neural networks. So in the video, you'll be seeing the cognitive packet network and a lot of these random neural networks doing various things in the system. And I'll try to explain briefly what happens. And once I've said that, then I'll move on and describe the principles of the random neural network, a little bit of perhaps other applications where it comes up and, the mathematical background and why this model and how. And then from there, I will go back again to the details of the cognitive packet network. So that's my meandering travel through today's lecture. So what I'm showing you now is actually an experiment, the video of an experiment, where you have on the left-hand side of your screen, you have a network with about 40 nodes. It was selected to look a little bit or quite a bit like the Swiss backbone network of a few years ago. And on the right-hand side, you see what in network jargon, not neural network jargon, but packet network or communication network jargon, we call quality of service. So you see on the part above, you see the delay, and on the part below, you see the jitter. But you also notice that on the right-hand side, and let's not talk about the left for a second, on the right-hand side, you see different colors for the measurements that are being reported. So the experiment is running, and as the experiment runs, we have measurements, but they are color-coded. And in fact, these color codes correspond to what, again, in network parlance, we call connections. A connection is a link, a series of links of, node-to-node links, a series of node-to-node links that go from a source node to a destination node, and which allow the source node and the destination node to exchange packets, and therefore to exchange data, to exchange programs, etc. So what you're seeing on the right-hand side is the delay experienced by different connections, the brown connection, the blue connection, the violet connection, the light blue connection, and so on. At the bottom, you have the jitter. Jitter is a second moment, which often is measured in network evaluations. So it's kind of a second moment of delay. And on the left-hand side now, you see the color codes again, and the color codes, and you see the paths, the connections. So you see, for instance, that there is a connection that is linking CPN 022, Cognitive Packet Network 022, a particular node, and some others. And then you see CPN 028 that is talking to CPN 042 through the blue line. But you see that these blue lines and the various lines are actually changing. So they're not pursuing the same path. The connections are identified, and that's a color code, but they're pursuing different paths. Why? Well, simply because the network on the left-hand side is being attacked. And that's why the little crosses that you see there appear, and then a bit later, now they have disappeared. What's going on? The network is being attacked by a worm. The network nodes are realizing that the worm exists, and because the links are blocked, they can't get their packets through. And because of that, then they adaptively change the paths so that they can assure the survival of the network of the communications, but at the same time, they are patching, they are regenerating the software so that they remove the worm, and then the worm comes back later, and so on. So this is going on across the network. And this is actually how the cognitive packet network works. Okay, so it's kind of an adaptive scheme that is running all the time, and that changes the paths in view of certain incidents. So the incidents can be attacks, as you see here, a worm is spreading, or the incidents can be a traffic overload on part of the network, or some link that has gone down or whatever, and then you have to keep on going, to keep on working. So where is the random neural network? Now the random neural network, there is one instance of the random neural network sitting at each of the nodes. Okay, so each of the little dots that you see on the left-hand side has a random neural network sitting there. And what is this random neural network doing? Oh, it's acting as an adaptive critic, that it is storing the recent history and then providing advice, providing recommendations to the node saying, look, now you should use this output link. Now you should use that output link. So it's giving the advice to the nodes with regard to how the communications should continue. Okay, so this is the general idea. And what algorithm is the random neural network using? In this particular case, it's not using backprop, it's not using deep learning or something like that. It's using reinforcement learning, because it's taking its decisions based on recent observations and updating its decisions. How does it update its decisions? Well, it updates its own weights. So it updates its weights. Then the state of the network is computed. That is the probability associated with each of the neurons in the network. These probabilities are computed. And the highest probability is the indicator of which neuron you should be listening to. I mean, each neuron is in charge of an output link and will be telling the node, look, send the packets this way, because as far as I can tell, this is the best right now. Okay, so I think at this stage you have a kind of a gross view of what the cognitive packet network does. It's running on top of the internet protocol. So there is nothing here which is in violation of the internet protocol, except that you have an additional random neural network that is advising each of the nodes individually. So it's sitting at each of the nodes, and there's no centralized control. It's a completely distributed control across the system. So having said that, let me go to a few slides. Okay, so these are pictures not of random neural networks, but of various academies to which I belong. And I view these institutions as actually quite useful. They're useful in their own countries, and they're useful as a network, because all of them are networked through ALEA, which is the All European Academies, whose seat is in Vienna, so happens, where there's also the seat of the Bösendorfer piano manufacturer. And I hope that in the introductory music they were using a Bösendorfer, because that's a Viennese piano. But now on to the random neural network. Now let's see what this kind of machine is. What is this machine sitting behind the cognitive packet network and behind other applications? It's a recurrent spiking model. I'm talking to a group of experts in neural networks, that is your field, and of machine learning and artificial intelligence. The random neural network is a recurrent spiking model. What does it mean by spiking? It means it's sending little spikes It's not an analog model. It's going to, as you will see, it's a frequency modulated model, like your brains. All of your brains are frequency modulated. I hope you realize that. And that's a very useful property to have. It's less noisy in a certain sense. And this random neural network has a certain number of nice properties. Okay, it has a so-called separable steady state behavior, which means that the joint probability distribution associated with each of the neurons can be written as the product of the marginal distributions associated with the neurons. This is an exceptional property that all stochastic networks don't have. This one does. You can do gradient learning with this model, and it's an approximator for all of the family of continuous and bounded functions. That is, if you're trying to learn some data that can be stored as a continuous and bounded function, then this model does the job. Okay, so you can tune the parameters of the model to learn to kind of mimic a continuous and bounded function. It can be run with various learning algorithms, not just backprop, deep learning, etc., but also reinforcement learning. You can do genetic algorithms with it, and you can do all kinds of interesting things. And there are some generalizations of the model, which I will mention. These are spiking activity, which are related to soma interactions. Okay, and also the possibility of studying the way a lot of densely clustered cells might be acting. Okay, so there are a lot of kind of interesting extensions to the model that I will briefly mention as I go along. So what inspired this model to me? Well, what actually inspired the model to me, I mean, what made me think about this model is these measurements from the early 80s by Terry Senovsky, very well-known individual, one of the pioneers, of course, also of all the backprop and so on activities, the PDP research group at University of California at San Diego. He's, I think, still there at the Salk Institute. So Terry Senovsky was one of the first physicists to seriously look at brains, at animal brains or cells, networks of cells, of neuronal cells, as biophysical systems. And he was the person who got these measurements. And these measurements show you exactly what I'm talking about. These are spikes, okay? These are sequences of spikes from one cell, exactly the same cell. There are 12 different experiments here. Each experiment is the cell firing, and it's being observed. Why is it firing? Because far away from the cell, from this particular cell, the cell is in the back of your brain, of the cat's brain, actually, this is a cat measurements, and the cat, they show the cat a light. So they show a light, and then they look at what this cell, how the cell fires over time. And you see that of these 12 experiments, although the external conditions are identical, there aren't any two which are identical. So they're all different. Random, okay, that's where random comes from. And you see that it is spiking in the sense that you don't have some kind of analog sigmoid or whatever. What you're seeing is actual electrical spikes being measured at the cell, okay? And they're all of the same unit amplitude. You can call this a unit amplitude. The unit in this particular case is 70 millivolts, as probably some of you know. So the random neural network then is a mathematical model, a mathematization of this, where you look at each cell as a discrete random variable, and you represent it by its internal potential. And this internal potential, K sub x for cell x, and K1, K2, Kn for the whole set of n cells, if you're looking at the network, okay? This is being represented as a Markov chain, and it's a Markov chain in continuous time, not the usual discrete Markov chains, but in continuous time. Why continuous time? Because we don't have a clock here in the picture, so we have to have continuous time. And the network will receive excitatory or inhibitory spikes from the outside, exogenous spikes, and will exchange inside the network. The cells will exchange excitatory and inhibitory spikes among each other, Okay, and this network has a topology which is determined by a probabilistic interconnection pattern, which is, what is the proportion of spikes that I send? I'm neuron 5. Well, what is the proportion of the spikes that I send that end up at neuron 17? Okay, and of these spikes that I send out, what is the proportion which is excitatory and what is the proportion which is inhibitory? And that is the Pxj, P plus Xj, P minus Xj. These are the kind of the representations of this interconnection pattern. Of course, you know that in our brains, cells are either excitatory or inhibitory. But for mathematical convenience, we allow any cell to do both, okay? But it's not, of course, biophysically realistic in all circumstances. But this is the way, and we know that we have excitatory cells and inhibitory cells, so we don't have the possibility of sending from one cell to all the other cells, both excitatory and inhibitory cells. And then some of the spikes that we send out are lost. And this is the probability d sub x that you see here at the bottom. D sub x is the probability the spike that x sends out is lost. And it happens, a lot of spikes get lost and don't end up on some other cell. So this is the representation of the model. You have these probabilities and, but you'd like to see weights, right? So every cell, and we know that there are, in biophysical reality, there are different types of cells. Some are fast, some are slow. As you probably know, the higher the cognitive level, the slower the cells are. And the lower you are close to your sensory system or sensory motor system, the faster the cells are. So you have an R sub I, which is right here, the R sub I, which is the rate of firing of cell I. How fast can it fire when it is excited? Okay, so some cells may be firing every millisecond, others may be firing every 10 milliseconds. So there may be a range of things of firing between cells. So these firing rates, R sub I, multiplied by the probability of connection from I to J, the excitatory connection from I to J, is the positive weight. Okay, and you see that the weight then becomes a rate. It's a frequency, it's a rate. And similarly, you will have the inhibitory rate from I to J, which acts as a weight. Now, what is amusing in this network is that all the weights are actually positive real numbers, or at least non-zero real numbers. They will be zero if you don't have connections between two cells. So then the weight will be zero. But these weights then are all of them are non-negative real numbers, so they don't have negative and positive values. And the mathematics of it doesn't have any problems with that. It works very well. And you will see in a minute what I mean by that. Now, you may also think that this model is a probabilistic generalization of a very old, 120-year-old model called Lapix's equation, or even more than 120 years old. So this is from a person who was working in Paris. So this is Lapix's equation, and so you can, which is kind of has delta functions and so on. So he also surmised, although at that time he couldn't actually measure it, he also surmised that there was this spiking activity going on. A random neural network then develops the behavior of these internal potentials, large K, for each cell, and of their firing pattern. And from this, you get, essentially, you end up getting some theorems that say how this system is working and what happens to it. You write, what you do is, because you're dealing with a continuous time Markov chain, we write so-called Chapman-Kolmogorov equations. Okay, Chapman was a very interesting chap. He was, he started his life, I think, as an astronomer, and then geologist and so on. So this was kind of the scientist that was jumping from subject to subject over his career. But one of the things he did was to develop these equations, which were then formalized by Kolmogorov. Of course, these are not only for neural networks, they're general continuous time Markov chain equations. So you get the Chapman-Kolmogorov equations, and then you solve them, okay, if you can. And the theorem, the key theorem about this random neural network is just this formula. Okay, it says that in steady state, okay, at the stationary state, the joint probability of the level of excitation of each cell is geometric. So you have qi to the power ki. Qi is a number between 0 and 1. It's a probability. It's actually the probability that the cell is excited. So you have qi to the power ki, 1 minus ki. But what is remarkable is that it's the product of the marginal probabilities associated with the cells. And I'm writing this now in a bigger form. And the bottom equation you have there is actually the operational formula that tells you how excitation and inhibition, this is a formula which says, well, the theorem says it has this form, but watch out, the Q's must have this form. And what do these things say? This is the arrival of excitatory spikes, the arrival rate of excitatory spikes to the neuron from the outside world, not from the network itself, from the outside world. Small lambda x is the arrival rate of inhibitory spikes to this neuron from the outside world. And R sub x is the neuron's firing rate, its speed, if you wish, how fast does it operate. And then you have, in the numerator and the denominator, you have the effect of all the other neurons in the network, either through excitatory interactions or actions on this cell. And in this case, you have W plus or omega plus Jx from some cell J to this cell X that we're interested in. And in the denominator, you have W minus Jx. So it's the weight, in the inhibitory weight in the denominator, the excitatory weight in the numerator, and all of these are non-negative quantities. They're not positive or negative, they're non-negative quantities. And there's a theorem that says that not only is this a solution, but that it is unique as long as all the QIs turn out to be less than 1. Because you have here a fixed point equation. If you look at that equation of the QIs, this is a nonlinear fixed point equation. And the theorem says that this solution is unique. If you kind of do the numerics and you find that the QIs are less than 1, then you're guaranteed that this is unique. And then there's another theorem. Of course, all of this took a while to produce. It didn't happen instantaneously, but it took a while to produce. And another theorem that says what I mentioned before, that these networks are able to approximate as accurately as you want any continuous and bounded function, okay, in a space of size, of course, at least the number of cells. So you have that theorem, which is kind of nice. So it tells you that you can do learning and you can actually approximate things as closely as possible with this network. Now, there are a lot of interesting generalizations of this result. And one is something which is imagined. Okay, there is no guarantee that what I'm saying here is true. What is true is the mathematics, but there is no guarantee that it exists in nature. Okay, and I kind of suspect that if there are a lot of cells that are sitting together closely, then the actual somas, the heads of the cells, if you wish, not the tails, not the dendritic tree, not the tails and the dendritic trees, but the heads, that these may be close to each other. And therefore that when one fires, then the other one fires, not through the dendritic interaction, but through the soma to soma interaction. Okay, and you can work out the math, and it turns out to get essentially the same result, that you have the product form, but your Q functions are going to be different. Okay, they're going to be given by these expressions. Okay, so there's a lot of literature about this, both at the theory end and at the applications end of these models. Just let me give you an example. A couple of examples. I'm just going to give one because I mentioned biology. This is about the biology of the whiskers of a rat. Okay, so these were measurements done by Nicolelis, and we worked with him. So what was going on was he was trying to explain or trying to understand why, despite the fact that the input to the sensory system, as shown here right at the bottom, so this is the sensory input, and this is very close to cognition. Okay, what you see here, these are the results of actual measurements. You have like a little pulse, so there's been spiking here, so you have a pulse of spikes in kind of a little packet of spikes, and then at the higher level you have a long oscillation, okay, which might last 100 milliseconds, 200 milliseconds, while here it's going to be a few milliseconds. So you have oscillation. So he was trying to understand what was creating these oscillations. And from this data, what we did was we built a mathematical model with the physiology, with the neurophysiology built into it. So what is there and what is connected? Because you can't easily do real experiments where you cut networks in an animal. First of all, the animal will not be happy. Secondly, there'll be a mess, lots of blood, etc. So you're going to have a lot of things which are going to interfere with your measurements. You can't conduct measurements in that context. So what we did was we built a mathematical experiment, a Gedanken experiment, to represent what was happening and to determine what were the feedback loops that were producing the effects that were observed experimentally. And we did this successfully. So we were able to build a model, calibrate it. And so this was our kind of a contribution back into the biology. Another thing I need to mention, which is kind of real now engineering, is learning. So the network, of course, it can be feed forward if you want. Just cut the feedback. But in general, it's going to be a feedback model in general. For instance, to control the cognitive packet network, we use a feedback. All of the RNNs that we put in the nodes are all feedback networks. So the theorem about existence and uniqueness, blah, 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 all of this about feedback networks. And so the feedback model part is kind of central to this theory. And the learning algorithm for the feedback network turns out to be a very kind of simple matrix inversion for a matrix W that you can see here in the picture. Okay, this matrix W that you also see there. So gradient descent just becomes essentially algebraic. That is, you're doing inversions of a matrix W. Now, W is not exactly a weight matrix. Okay, it's not a weight matrix, but it is related to the weight matrix, and it is related to the topology. So the connectivity is identical to actually the connectivity of the weights, but the W's are not weights, but they're transformed variants of the weights. So that's kind of the learning. Of course, all of these things are you can find in journal articles in neural computation or in the IEEE transactions on neural networks and so on. So you can find the stuff. Okay, so just a couple of other applications. Okay, one application that we did, which was patented and even sold to Sandoz, was about segmentation of MRI images. So it was to detect tumors in MRI images. So using the recurrent network as a filter to identify textures inside the brain. And when you ask me questions, I'll explain to you why it was done this way. And another application was to video compression. So we built video compressors this way. And another application was to learning and reproduction of color textures. So here you have a texture on the left-hand side. So the left-hand column is the original textures. They are then learned by the recurrent random neural network. And then on the right-hand side, you have the same neural network, which acts as a relaxation engine. You just push a button and say, now please reproduce the texture by iteration. So it starts iterating until it reaches some steady state, and the steady state is the texture. Okay. In this case, each neuron represents a pixel and a color. So it's like an RGB neuron. So the neurons are RGB neurons, and they learn the texture on the left-hand side and reproduce it on the right-hand side. So there I've given you a bit of a, I won't go through other applications, there are quite a few. Every day when I look at the information I get from Google Scholar, I see someone who has applied it to something else, so which is fine. And let me just now slowly go back to the initial question, which was our cognitive packet network. But this may be actually a time to pause and as I reorganize my slides, a time to pause and for me to answer perhaps a couple of questions if there are.
I would have two questions here. So firstly, regarding the cool worm video, do the networks in the different nodes actually share some weights or exchange information as part of the reinforcement learning?
Not directly. Not directly, and they don't, so it's a completely distributed decision scheme. So every node uses local information, okay? However, I need to explain a little bit how the system works for things to become clearer, okay? So I'd rather not go into that.
Okay.
And not go into this particular point because I'm going to be explaining a certain number of things which hopefully will answer your question. Okay, but
Wonderful.
the answer basically is no. The system, the nodes all work in an autonomous manner.
Okay, and I have a second question here regarding these multi-level neural spike connections. It's very cool how this is inspired from what we see in nature. And I was just wondering, you were discussing these neighborhoods from the somata. Have you explored any other local or structural constraints or priors on the interconnection weights?
Honestly, not, other than through the actual examples we looked at. And there are a number of them. Now, let me just tell you in a way why. Because I've talked to, for a while, not now, I'm not doing it anymore, but for a while, I was talking to a lot of neuroscientists. Okay. And I'd say, is this possible? Oh, they say, yes, I've seen that. And anything I was suggesting as is it possible or is not possible, they claim to have seen it somewhere in some neural subsystem.
Okay.
Okay, except some basic facts that that you have, for instance, that cells in the brain are either excitatory or inhibitory. There are some basic things, but and of course also associated with time constants, the range of time constants which are possible.
Right.
But other than that, it was very hard to say this doesn't happen and this just occurs because there is such a wide variety of animals and such a wide variety of neural systems that the answers were always, but this happens and that happens and this happens, this can happen and I've seen it in this version and,
Okay.
So which is fun, of course.
Okay.
Let me give you an example. Now, again, in the period when I was kind of hanging around, going to various labs and talking to, putting my innocent face and talking to the various very, very knowledgeable neuroscientists. Once I ended up in a lab at the Collège de France in Paris, and it was the lab of Henri Korn, Korn. I think he's retired now, but he's a very well-known neurobiologist. Okay? And also electrophysiologist. And he had a room, a bit like your office or that you're showing us in the back, kind of a room about this size, but all the walls were electronics. Then in the middle, he had a big tank, water tank. And in this tank was a kind of a sizable fish, perhaps, I don't know, 30, 40 centimeter size fish going around. The fish was instrumented. They had, wires. It wasn't wireless yet at that time. It was wires going to the fish. And what they were doing, what they were measuring was they were creating a snap sound in the water and looking what the fish would do. but not just looking what the fish would do, but because basically what happened was they had discovered that the ear of the fish was directly connected to the tail of the fish. So it was
Okay.
bypassing the brain.
Okay.
So the ear was connected to the tail, and the tail was randomized. So the neuron operating the muscle in the tail was exactly a random neuron.
Okay.
Why? Because the fish, every time it heard a snap, it would suppose there was a prey, a predator.
Hmm.
A predator was around.
Yeah.
So it would move its tail to do evasive action.
Right.
But every evasive action had to be different from the previous one,
Hmm.
right? So it was cycling some kind of random number generator and moving a tail at random. There was one neuron controlling the tail, another neuron at the ear level, and the direct connection between the two. So this is just to tell you the variety of things that you can
Yeah,
see.
very impressive. We have two more questions on the chat, if I
Okay.
may. Three actually. So Andrzej Kucik from the European Space Agency is asking whether these networks have been implemented on neuromorphic hardware platforms already, and if so, how you could train them.
Yeah, they've been implemented in actually some years ago. They were implemented in FPGA platforms.
Mm-hmm.
And the purpose was to see whether certain things could be simplified to accelerate the computations, whether they could, for instance, take just positive and negative values rather than actual weights
Mm-hmm.
and things of that nature, simplifications. So yes, there was work in FPGA on FPGA platforms, and I could also probably point to the PhD thesis that came out of that. So the answer is yes. Yeah.
Excellent. Then I have a question by Ivan Shogar, who thanks you for the talk so far, and he was wondering if you could explain the transformation between the input data, such as the images, to spikes and then back to images, for instance, on brain tumor segmentation or a similar
Right,
task.
right. Now, it's not they're not translated directly into spikes, but they're translated to spiking rates, the large lambda I.
Okay.
Okay, so you can have, for instance, a spiking rate for red,
Hmm.
and the spiking rate can be larger or smaller depending on the intensity of the red color in this particular pixel.
Hmm. And this encoding is learned, or
The inputs are not learned, the weights are
mhm,
learned.
the weights are learned?
Okay,
Okay.
so the inputs are given, whatever they may be,
Hmm.
and you learn from examples. For instance, if you're doing tumor, you start with calibrated tumor images,
Hmm.
where the medical doctor has actually identified areas which they think are not for the, you generate data based on medical knowledge.
Hmm.
And you identify areas in the MRI scan which are tumor areas which are not, and areas which are undecided, which are suspicious but can't tell whether they are or not. So you have that, and then you use those to educate, to train the network using the gradient descent algorithm that I mentioned. That was exactly the algorithm that was used,
Hmm.
which is ON3 for a recurrent network. It's of complexity ON3, where N is
Hmm.
a number of cells, of
Hmm.
neurons. Okay, and then once it's been trained, then you pass you scan the whole MRI image, but not the same one. You scan other MRI images, and you create regions of interest, regions which are suspected as being tumor areas. So that is exactly how it works. In the case of compression, what you do is, for instance, if you're compressing a conversation, for instance, a video conversation, okay, you're going to again train it on a certain amount of video, and then you let it compress by itself.
Hmm.
So I mean, you train it again. It's going to be a gradient descent training in this particular case, and that's how we did it. Okay.
Thank you. I have a question here from a gentleman where I apologize in advance for probably mispronouncing the name. This is from Tathagata Bandyopadhyay. And the question is, when you learn the weights, is there a mechanism that ensures the matrices are invertible, or is a general pseudo-inverse taken?
No, the matrices are invertible.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Is this by construction, or is this through some trick?
No, the inversion of the matrices is closely connected to the existence and uniqueness of the solutions.
Mm-hmm.
So if you are under conditions where the solutions exist, where the Q sub i's are less than 1, in other words, then your matrices are invertible.
Thank you
It's
so
not an artificial construct, it's a
much.
fact. It will work both for a feed-forward network and for a recurrent network. So they're
Thank you
not
very
pseudo
much.
inverses, they're actual
Mm-hmm.
inverses.
Great. So I think we've had a range of questions.
Yes,
I would
yes.
suggest we move back to your
Okay,
exciting presentation
okay.
and continue with questions after that,
So
if that's
now I
fine with
go
you.
to my slides concerning the cognitive packet
Wonderful.
network. In this particular case, I mean, just like in the other work, if you look at the Google Scholar webpage, you can find quite a few papers related to the random neural network. In my own Google Scholar website, you can see quite a few from the last years, 2020 and so on. And here are a certain number of papers that you can look at which describe this idea at various stages of advancement or of complexity. The most recent paper I'm pointing to, there are more recent papers, but the one that you can easily find, which is open access, is the Proceedings of the IEEE. It's the journal of the IEEE, the main masthead journal. And it's called Self-Aware Networks that Optimize Security, Quality of Service, and Energy. Have a look there. And then you can also look at the 2016 paper, Olivier Brun, Lan Wang, and myself, Big Data for Autonomic Intercontinental Overlays, which also describes this particular cognitive packet network and how it is used to do very large intercontinental networks. Let me just point to kind of a little bit the philosophy. The whole networking field, communications field, and large networks, has gone from a situation where, if you wish, the telecom bureaucracy, because that's what we should call them, the old telecom companies, national telecom companies, the telecom bureaucracies knew exactly what they were dealing with in terms of a network. It was kind of a well-defined, not very big, with central controls, hierarchical tree-like structures, and so on. So you could kind of figure out and control everything. This has radically changed progressively with the internet. It didn't happen all at once, but this is going on and on and on and on. It's being kind of destroyed by what I call the barbarians and the Roman Empire. I mean, the Roman Empire builds roads, it puts very fast fiber optics cables and so on, and then the barbarians come in and they modify the system and they attach various things, and no one knows anymore what's going on. So this is going on. This is what's happening. So I think today the old methods of dealing with telecommunications are dead. We can't kind of define things and design things top down. We have to rely on measurement, adaptation, and online modification. So this is a fact of the matter, and I consult for Huawei or on and off, and one of their problems is the millions of incidents that they have to handle in a day and try to understand. By incidents, I mean this is not working. The thing is strange. We're getting some strange. They have to take all of this and somehow make sense of it. Okay, they have to make sense of it, and definitely the approach of I know everything and I can control my system perfectly, that's gone. The other thing is that we have, of course, the obligation to optimize user satisfaction. Okay, provide quality of service, provide security when we're designing networks or when an operator is running a network. However, again, this cannot be done in a top-down fashion. We have to find kind of more bottom-up and adaptive schemes for doing this. And this is what pushes the idea for the cognitive packet network. Let me say a few things which are kind of obvious, but they're worth saying. Networks are communication networks, I mean, and let alone our brain networks, but communication networks are distributed extremely large. We have information delay. I mean, if we want information about anything in the network, we have to spend milliseconds or hundreds of milliseconds to get it. Yet, that time is comparable to the time it takes the system to change. So it's once we get that information from a long distance, it's useless. We're going to have control delays, which means we're going to have to be able to tell different network parts what to do. And that in itself is going to also take time. And then we have the combinatorial explosion. The system is so large that any optimization across a very large system is going to be slow and is going to happen too late. Okay. In addition, the traffic is varying dynamically all the time, and there can be lots of failures and so on. So we go to, I mean, the motivation for the cognitive packet network is the need to do learning and adaptivity, which is going to be relevant both to the operators of the network, the people that you and I pay money to, like Orange or whoever, and the users. The users want some quality of service, the operators want a system that runs, and the only way to do it is actually through online measurement and through adaptation. So when we do that, the first thing that we must agree on or define is some objective. Okay, this objective should be something. Why do I say agree on? Because then, if you have such an objective, you tell everyone, all the nodes in the network, try to pursue this objective. Okay, so whether it's this node or that node, they have basically the same objectives. And you can think of, I'm formalizing things a little bit here. You can think about objectives which include delay. Of course, a very, very slow network is useless. Loss, a network that's losing stuff all the time, is useless. And of course, in networks, we have schemes, algorithms, which will retransmit data if one is pretty sure or one is expecting that it has been lost. Then we have security, which is kind of a quote-unquote new subject, but not so new because that's a big, big issue. And we have energy consumption. Now, energy is kind of new because we've been for years going on in the never, never world where, computers were virtual, but they're not virtual. They consume a lot of energy, and network nodes, they run 3-4 kilowatts. And so on. So you have, every node is going to be a multiple kilowatt machine, and the servers and the clouds and so on, they're all consuming energy. And this energy consumed by information technology is increasing by about 5% or so a year. So it's getting to be quite bad. So especially with climate change and so on, it's becoming priority things. We need to take these quantities that we call delay, loss, energy, security. We have to be able to measure them. Okay, if we can't measure them, it's useless. And we have to combine them in an objective function, which I call the goal, or G. Okay, and this G in this particular slide has quality of service, call it delay and loss, energy consumption, security. Okay, let's refine this a little bit and write it down here in a kind of slightly different way. We say, well, if I have no losses, that's the probability 1 minus L, then I'm interested in my delay, in my energy, and my security. And what is small a, small b, small c? Oh, they're just the weights, how much importance I give to each one of them. Okay. And they can all actually be mapped into economic quantities because, for instance, energy costs money. I mean, if you measure energy in joules or watt hours, then, well, my God, that B is the multiplicative factor that turns the watt hours into euros or dollars and cents and whatever. So you can map all, and when with respect to D, you have so-called service level agreements. You shouldn't exceed that, and you know that if you exceed, then you're going to pay a penalty, and this is going to cost you cost the operator money. So you have all of these things coming into the picture. So you have G1 minus L. If there are no losses, then I have AD plus B, etc. If I have a loss, then I have the same as before because I already consumed them until I got a loss for a packet. But then in addition, I will have to retransmit the packet. So into the future, I have to map the impact of a loss into its possible repetition. And in fact, this may happen many times and will. Typically, for instance, if you have a network where which is overloaded, then you're going to have, the same packet will be lost several times, and you have to deal with it. Now then, you have this goal function, okay, and I'll tell you in a minute what Nfp mean. You have this goal function which you can write in this manner. So it's 1 minus loss in the denominator, and you have the other things in the numerator. So you see that if the loss tends to 1, that less loss probability tends to 1, then of course this goal function explodes. It tends to infinity. Now, what is NFP? Well, okay, F is the flow. F is the connection. You remember there were the color codes in the video? Those are connections. There's a source and a destination, and that's what they are. That's what the flows are. F is a connection. And what's P? P is a path. Okay, P is a path. You saw in the video that the paths were changing, right? So the delay is going to depend on which flow it is, because the flow has a certain traffic rate, a certain statistical characteristic of the traffic, and P is a path which can have more or less nodes. The nodes can be say identical or different, and so on. So you can understand that the delay depends on the flow and on the path. And what's small n? Well, n is my decision point. Where am I getting ready to take a decision? Okay, n is a decision point, and n can be the source of the flow, or it can be any node on the path that the flow is currently using. Okay, so for a given flow f and for a given path p, at any point n, you take decisions, which is what the video was showing. So each of them is kind of changing things and trying to optimize with the help of the random neural network. Okay, I hope this gives you an intuitive view of how to go about. Now, with respect to various parameters, everyone knows how you measure delay. How do you measure delay? Well, you can send out a packet and wait for the acknowledgement to come back. And then you have the round trip delay. You have an estimate of delay. You can also ping. Once the path is not changing too fast, if you ping it, you get an estimate of delay. So we all know how to handle delay. How about loss? Well, loss, true. Why? Because you send out packets and you look at the number of acknowledgements coming back. The difference between the number that go forward and the number that go back give you the number that apparently have not been acknowledged. There's been a problem. Okay, so from that you can create an estimate of L, the loss ratio, the packet loss ratio, which is going to be the number lost divided by the total number sent. Okay, so that gives you an estimate of L. There are two other things, for instance, security and energy, that I'll say a few words about because they're a bit more unusual. You can define security, let's call it small s, which is up there, okay, regarding some node m and some node f. You're going to have a threshold here, which is how much insecurity do I accept? Okay, 10%, 15% insecurity. How can I estimate this? Well, I can put that in an attack detector. An attack detector is a piece of software or a piece of firmware that examines the packets going by and indicates whether these look like normal or they look like a botnet packet. So they look like packets that are trying to infiltrate the system. So for instance, if you have a node and you're observing it, and if, for instance, the packet addresses, source addresses, are changing very rapidly, this is suspicious because it looks like they're randomly spoofing their origins. Okay, so there are many different ways that you can look at an attack, at a packet trace and determine whether there is an attack or not. And how about I? Well, T is the threshold. How much do I tolerate? And I is exactly what I've said, which is the output of the attack detector. Okay. Now you can say my level of insecurity, S, what I don't like, I mean, I'm going to evaluate the security level of this thing, is going to be the difference between I, what my attack detector says, and my tolerance, T. Okay. And then, okay, if I is less than T, I don't care, I call it 0. And if I is larger than T, says the formula, then I'm worried about it and I report some insecurity. Now I can then, from the node insecurity, and this is node M, I can go back to the path insecurity, going from, that's in red, going from the source node N or some node N through all the paths, so all the nodes that come after N on the path P for this particular flow. So I end up getting this information either as a sum of this insecurity, or I can get it bottom as a max. I can say I don't really care about the sum. I really care about the place where it is the worst. And you know, if the place, because I may have a lot of little things and I don't care about that, but I may care only if something very bad is happening somewhere. So you can, what I'm just trying to say is you can transform the security issue into a measurable metric that you would put into the goal function. Now, how about energy? I won't spend that much time on energy because I don't have that much time, but that is measured in the following way. Suppose that you measure the power consumption at a node. That is fairly straightforward. You can put instrumentation in nodes. Even, you know, a node typically knows what its current power consumption is. You can have instrumentation for that. And if you divide the power consumption by the current traffic rate in packets per second, you're going to get the energy per packet. Okay, the energy consumption per packet. Why? Because you have watts, which is energy per second. Okay, and in the numerator, in the denominator, you have packets per second, which is traffic rate. And when you divide one by the other, you're going to have energy divided by packets. So you're going to have energy per packet by dividing power with traffic rate. So you can put actual data into this, and we've done it. I mean, we've actually instrumented all these things. So you can actually do it. And what does the optimization do? I mean, everyone has agreed on a goal. They have it. They're using it. They've all generated data to get the goal. So what they do is they compute the argmin. Okay, they say my path P star is the one. The path that I will use now from here forward is the one that minimizes the goal. Okay, so the theoretical principle of this is clear. Everyone agrees on a common goal, and you give everyone the job to pursue it. Okay, at their own level, they all pursue this. So this is the general approach that is used in the cognitive packet network. But since we are not going to run a nonlinear optimization to determine argmin, okay, we're not going to go into kind of expensive things that require a lot of computation. What we're going to do is we're going to implement it through reinforcement learning. Okay, and in fact, you can see immediately the link between the goal function, the term goal, okay, and the way we usually do reinforcement learning. However, we need some help. The cognitive packet network doesn't do it just with IP packets. So it has actually 3 types of packets. The third type is the usual packet, which carries data in the network. Okay, we call them dumb packets, stupid packets. Why? Because they're just carrying data. Okay? And then we have 2 other packets. We have smart packets. Now the smart packets do not carry data. Their job is not to transfer data in the network. Their job is to do observations. So they go to a node and they ask the node, what is your energy consumption right now? They go to the node and say, what is the loss rate from this link right now? So they collect data from the various nodes, okay? And they travel through the network themselves based on reinforcement learning. So they in each node, they ask the neural net that's there as the adaptive critic and say, to get to this destination, what is the best next hop? Okay, they ask that, and the neural network gives them the information. And then the smart packets move along node to node in this manner, and they reach, of course, these smart packets are all very, very disciplined Japanese citizens. So if they've been around too long, they commit harakiri. Okay? If they've been there for more than 2 or 3 times the diameter of the network, they're not going to flood the network, so they're going to kind of disappear. However, most of them will make it, in a reasonable amount of time to the destination, and from the destination, then they will head back to the source. On which path? On the path they have traveled. And as they come back to each node, they will bring back, for instance, if a node wants to know how much time this packet has taken to reach the destination, they have it from the smart packet, because the smart packet was at that node, measured the time there, arrived to the destination, measured the time there, and then came back to the node and knows what the time is here. So they have an estimate of the forward delay, and they have an accurate value for the round trip delay. So the smart packets are doing this and collecting data, and when the smart packet comes back to a node, the data it brings back is used to update the weights of the random neural network. Okay? So it's a random neural network. I skip all this stuff because these slides are kind of, all of this is has already been said. So the random neural network has one neuron per output link of that particular node. Okay, so it's sitting on some node. This node has a given number of output links. And what is the job of this random neural network? It is to tell the smart packet which is the next output link it should follow. Okay, so this random neural network does not recommend on the whole forward path because things can change. It just recommends on the first step. And how does it do that? Its weights are being updated, and I'll show you in a minute how they're updated. It's standard reinforcement learning. And once the weights are updated, the Q sub i's or Q sub x's associated with each of the neurons is calculated using this formula. Q sub x equals so divided by so. You remember that formula? So it uses that, calculates the weights, calculates the Q's, and having calculated the Q's, it selects the highest Q, and the highest Q is the advice. It says, well, the largest of these Q's is for link 5. So take link 5 as you leave this node. Okay, go out through door number 5. Now, the reinforcement learning is done in the following manner. We have the goal G. Okay, everyone uses the same goal G. And we compute the reward, the inverse of the goal. Okay, the goal is what we want to minimize. The reward is what we want to maximize. And we establish a historical value of the reward. So we update T sub L, which is every time a smart packet comes to this node, we update T sub L with what was the reward, what is the new reward value, historical reward value, and we insert it into this value T, okay, which we keep over time. Small a is less than 1, and small a represents, if small a is big, it means you give a lot of importance to recent events. If small a is small, then you give little importance to recent events and more to the past. Okay? So we typically have tuned the value of A so that the average history is of the order of 10 smart packets that have come back to the node. And once we have this value T, and we have the new value of the reward, so we have T sub L minus 1, we compare it to R sub L, the reward that came after the computation of T sub L minus 1. And we say, well, if this reward is better than the historical situation, I will strengthen the weights which contributed to this success. Okay, the last output link I used was output 7. I will strengthen the excitatory weights going to 7, and I will weaken all the other, I will strengthen all the other inhibitory weights. So I will weaken the probability that the others are dominant next time around. So at each step, I either strengthen the one that was successful, or else at the bottom, well, this one was not successful. Then what I do is I reinforce all the inhibitory weights to this particular node, and I strengthen all the others so that among them, the one that's strongest has a chance to succeed, to give me the next advice. Okay. Then there's a renormalization, because we don't want these parameters to constantly grow or constantly become smaller. We kind of renormalize everything, and we compute the fixed point. Okay. So this is exactly how the system is working. I think I'll just show you one curve here, and then I'll go to the video again just to explain, through the video what was happening, and you'll see it more clearly. In this case, we're seeing an experiment where the goal G was just the delay. Okay, very simple. Goal G is just the delay, because you're not seeing any compromises here. It's just one thing that you want. And you're looking at the average delay experienced in milliseconds, experienced by either the dumb packets, the payload packets, they're at the bottom, or the smart packets, they're at the top, or the average value. Okay. And what is the x-axis? The x-axis is the percentage of smart packets that I have added on top of my normal traffic. My normal traffic is the dumb packets. They're carrying what my customer, what the end user wants. The smart packets are just there to spy and to conduct searches using reinforcement learning. So they do that. But what you see here is that the smart packets are improving as their number increases. Okay, so there's a collective learning going on. However, the dumb packets, they improve much faster. And why is that? It's interesting, because the dumb packets benefit from several optimizations as it goes down to the source, because the source is also seeing what the smart packets are bringing back. Okay, the source also has that information, and the source is able to introduce an additional level of optimization as compared to the intermediate nodes. So the dumb packets are much more successful than the smart packets. The smart packets are making mistakes necessarily. Okay, and there's also a randomization that I have not mentioned in the smart packets, which is related to the usual, if you wish, temperature content of simulated annealing. I mean, if you think of this as some kind of distributed annealing process, you can see that they need to have some kind of randomization. And the randomization is to avoid that you miss something good, that you don't try to optimize and get caught in a local minimum. Every so many smart packets behaves at random. So it moves forward, not all the time at random, but it'll take, at any node, I will have every, say, 10 smart packets, one will not be sent according to the advice of the adaptive critic, but will be sent forward at random so that you explore other possibilities. Okay, so this is the general idea, and it's been applied a number of places. You're going to say, is there any industry testbed? Yes, there is one right now. There's one at Deutsche Telekom in Berlin. So we've had, in this work, always interaction with industry, and still today we have interaction with industry. So we've always worked with, gave some of the intellectual property to British Aerospace for some defense networks. We've been talking to Huawei about this, about possibilities. We've been working with Deutsche Telekom in recent years, and they're using it for their IoT, if you wish, customer premises IoT network, and they're demonstrating it in Berlin, and so on. So let me just then go to the video again, and then that will perhaps warm up for questions.
So I had a more generic question here, and I will probably again have trouble pronouncing the name correctly. Przemysław Kudwacik wonders more generally, are there any limitations of these random neural networks compared to other types of neural networks in terms of what
No,
they can do or structures?
we've used them. I mean, we've run, I haven't talked about this here, but we've run them on the usual character recognition, image recognition, and so on examples, and they do a little bit better. So with deep learning, I mean, deep learning after all is backprop, but let's call it deep learning. So yes, they've been run again. They have no limitations on the standard problems. We've done combinatorial optimization, of course, not with the reinforcement learning. So this is a reinforcement learning example that I've shown you today. We've done it on gradient learning on the images that I talked to you earlier. We've done it with deep learning on image sets, and we get slightly, but it's at the percentage level, the accuracy is already so high. So we get like, if it's 97, we might get 98%. But basically, yes, they don't really have anything that limits them as compared to existing McCulloch-Pitts networks.
Okay. I have a question here regarding this goal function that you showed. I understand that the components can be arbitrary functions of the packets, but it is a linear combination. And I was wondering whether you have explored other convex functions or other nonlinear goal functions, and whether there are any constraints on what the goal function needs to look like so that the training is efficient.
Yeah, in the goal function, in the denominator, the loss introduces a nonlinearity.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so it's a mixed linear nonlinear thing. Um, but there is no. In some cases, you have to, especially if you're talking to industry, you have to keep the thing simple and tell them, I'm looking at a linear combination of.
Okay. So it's more a
Yeah,
communication question of
if you
communicating
say
the.
you write a
Yeah.
very complicated thing, and they say, why did you choose it, and how does it work, and what happens, and so on. So, in a practical setting, it's easier to have a conversation with people if the metrics are kept as simple as possible.
Mm-hmm. Okay, fair enough. There is a question by Amlan asking what the scope is in this technique for transfer learning.
I personally have not tried it. I don't know if anyone has. Well, one idea would be. I mean, there's the question is very good, especially in the example I'm showing, because you could say, well, suppose I train some, I put this scheme in some of the nodes,
Hmm.
and then I export it to others, right? How would it work? So there is that issue. But of course, in the network context that you're seeing, the topology is very important. Where you are is very
Hmm.
important. So the way you're going to decide things is going to be very influenced by your
Okay.
local experience, because
Mm-hmm.
networks are not homogeneous.
Sure. Have you done any meta-analysis of the
No,
weights learned within
no,
such a complex
no,
topology?
no. But I think the question is
Hmm.
very good.
Hmm.
Question is very good. We've tried different topologies. For instance, the current implementation that we're working on is based actually on something called software-defined networks.
Mhm.
So software-defined networks are basically a hierarchical version of a network where you have some so-called controllers which decide routing for everyone else. Okay, so you have certain
Mhm.
software which are more powerful. You have more powerful machines, which are so-called SDN controllers, and you have the SDN controllers. Then you have the SDN routers or switches, and in that case, the algorithm, the switches provide information to the controller.
Mhm.
The controller decides for everyone,
Okay.
and this is something that's being used in industry.
Mhm.
So we have implemented it. Of course, whenever you do things like that, the algorithm changes, the way you implement it changes. It's not like take the same thing and do it again. So
Mhm.
yes, we've done it in that case. So we have looked at quite a few different. We've looked at this in the wireless case, for instance, for ad hoc
Mhm. Mhm.
networks, for wireless ad hoc networks. So we have looked at this in various contexts. But the question about transfer learning is interesting, um, uh, but it would have some limitations in networks because networks are not uniformly organized. In
Right.
fact, that's one of the difficulties, and that's one of the reasons why this approach might be good, because you just install a neural network and it learns. You
Mhm.
don't have to know in advance what the topology is.
Okay. Seeing that you have a complex network and the nodes learn autonomously, have you been able, maybe even without a formal meta-analysis, infer some qualitative conclusions about what routing strategies work, say in highly connected hubs or at the edge? I mean, are there any qualitative insights that you can sort of extract from the result
Yeah.
of the
So
learning?
this is abstraction from what is observed.
Mm,
Uh, it's so much, again, it's so much dependent on what is actually happening. Okay, because there are two things at play. One is the topology, but it's not just the topology, it's also the speed of the links. In a network, all the
mm,
links are not at the same speed.
I see.
Even in a real network, all the routers are not identical. In this
Okay.
case, they are. They're all boxes. They're all Linux boxes,
Mhm.
cheap Linux boxes. So they're all identical. But in a real network, you'll have very different types of routers. And uh, in a say a fog network, an edge network, and so on, you'll have different conditions, different types of objects which are connected. So the variety is so big that my intuition is that it's better to let everyone learn their stuff rather than try to infer what they should be doing.
Okay, fair enough. I have a handful of more applied questions here, if I may, on the channel.
Sure.
There was a question: is there any mechanism that avoids routing packets in loops?
Of course, of course, of course. I didn't go into all the details.
Mhm.
Okay? The first thing is that the packets, if they revisit the same node, they're discarded.
Okay.
Okay, if a packet comes a second time to a node, it knows, I mean, the packet knows its own identity, it knows the nodes it's visited because it collects all this data as it goes along. If it hits it again, then it discards itself. That's the simplest thing.
Mhm.
The second thing is that the node will always, I said it chooses the best output, but it chooses the best output except the one that it just used before.
Okay. Then there was a question by Birol Guyumchu. If one wanted to try and apply or learn about your networks, are there any open implementations, perhaps in one of the popular frameworks, whether that's PyTorch or TensorFlow, or even something that does not make use of these
So,
libraries?
would it be possible? The question is, would it be possible to implement this now? Implementing it online and doing it easily is not easy
Mhm.
because you have to get into the operating system level.
Okay, so this is
So
actually implemented at the node level rather than.
yeah, it's
Mhm,
implemented at the it's a modification of the IP routing level
mhm.
node. So you have to
And
go down to the systems level. Now, if
mhm.
someone wants to propose something and would like to try it, we can make it happen.
Okay. And the RNNs, are these available as libraries for people to explore
Yeah, there are
within the various
RNNs
frameworks?
online. There are RNNs
Hmm.
online. People can certainly explore that, and there have been many users. Yes. So yeah, yeah.
Okay, excellent. So then there are just two more questions on the application side. So Valerie Pinfield was wondering whether these networks would be well suited to generate uh, proposed material structures, for instance, for porous media, seeing that they learned color textures well, could this be extended to 3D and structures easily? Or is there some limitations regarding the connectivity or the dimensionality of the process?
No, the network can be large or small.
Mhm.
It has an advantage. Let me just mention something which is I think advantageous. It's that you can, for instance, if you have a large network, you can say, well, suppose I really make it very large and take the limit as the number of cells tends to infinity. What's the transfer function?
Okay.
Okay, because you have explicit formulas for the behavior of the network. And a lot of things like that can be done, which is one of the things we've used in the deep learning thing, because we said, well, we're going to take a uniform network, a network with every node is going to have some kind of uniformly probabilistic connectivity. And let's look at what happens if the number of cells becomes very large. So we can then do some simplifications of the calculations, make the calculations faster. Okay? So you can do things like that. But the idea of porous media or of 3D 3D structures is very good. I haven't tried it. I'd be happy to help anyone who's interested in doing that.
Excellent. There were a number of questions asking for clarifications about how the RNNs actually work. And I was wondering if someone wanted to dive deeper, is there a particular paper of yours that you would recommend as a starting point?
Yeah, you can look at the first papers, they're very readable. The first three papers, which appeared in Neural Computation, 89, 90, 92, first four papers, 89, 90, 92, 94, they're very readable. So you can look at that. You can look at the IEEE transactions on neural nets papers from 99, 2000. Those are all very readable.
Wonderful. So we already shared the Google Scholar link for your profile, so people can find these papers there.
Right.
So if there are no additional questions,
The DPLB is easier to use.
DPNB, okay.
DPLB, the German computer science
Ah, yes,
database.
DPNB.
They tend to have a lot of things, but certainly Google Scholar will be fine.
DPNB. Excellent. We will point people to this. So with that, I would like to thank you very much
Thank you.
for this wonderful
Thank you very much.
presentation and good discussion. I was really very impressed and I much enjoyed the examples and the discussion.
Thank you very much for your encouragement. It encourages me to work harder.
Oh, it's wonderful. And I do hope we can welcome you in Vienna very soon.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Erol, and have a good evening to everyone.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Appreciate it.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.